I'll make a motion to approve.
Support.
Motion by Scott, supported by Pat, to approve the minutes from the October meeting, October 2nd meeting. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Same sign. Motion carried. General public comment. This is an opportunity to allow people to offer comments or questions on items that are not on the agenda. So if there's anybody here that's on a non-agenda item, you can come forward. Seeing none, we will move along to case number 19-846. Involves a proposed porch enclosure special exception use permit at 1529 Winslow Street Northwest. The applicant and owner, Brian Sindelar, seeks a special exception use permit from the Walker Planning Commission to enclose a previously unenclosed porch, which is set back approximately 15 feet from the front lot line. Again, this is a public hearing, but as we start our deliberations, we'll ask the planning director, Dan Power, to offer introduction to the proposal.
Okay. All right, I'll do that and then we can open public hearing. So I'll make my comments brief. I don't have any slides for this one, just an image on the overhead here, and there are some graphics in your packet. This is a case that is not a conventional site plan review. It's not something you folks typically see, and in fact I haven't brought this type of issue to the Planning Commission in my entire time here, so it's pretty rare. But this came to me after our building official had been reviewing a building permit application after I think the applicant found out that they had to apply for a building permit for this type of work. There was a catch that the structure was pretty close to the front lot line. So that's when our building official flagged that to me. And then as I looked at this more closely, I thought, you know, that's an existing porch, or was a pre-existing porch. And I was trying to evaluate it in the context of where the front lot line is, if this requires a variance to do any more improvement in that area because you're within that front yard setback. But then what I found is we do have a provision for just enclosing a previously unenclosed porch. And I think that's true of whether you have a lawfully non-conforming front yard porch, as in it's within that front yard setback, or if it's inside the normal permitted area for a porch. Either way, it goes to the Planning Commission as a special use permit. It's one of only a couple things that does that. Most of the things that you review as special use permits are land uses that are kind of designated as special within a zoning district that normally come in with a site plan review application, or sometimes it doesn't involve a lot of site work, like a gym in an industrial building. That kind of thing is a special use. Land use that's kind of disjointed with the surrounding land uses. Those are usually filtered through the special use permit process. But there are two additional items that go through this special use permit review process, one of them being this enclosure of a previously unenclosed porch. Now I said the porch is already only about 15 feet from the front yard lot line, but in my interpretation, this is all covered by this review by you folks at the Planning Commission. This is not really a variance item because the foundation and the posts and all the vertical elements of this porch are already kind of set up. Now we're just talking about enclosing it through this special use permit process. So that's why we're here. There are still special use permit criteria that you have to evaluate for something like this. And technically a site plan, and in lieu of a site plan, there's just a simple drawing in this packet that shows where this lays out in the property. And you can see right there, the existing conditions kind of serve as the site plan. But you still look at things like whether the enclosed porch will be sufficiently designed to avoid a visual nuisance, whether there's architectural compatibility with the enclosed porch in relation to some of the vicinity architecture, ensuring that the porch will not be injurious to the surrounding land uses in any way, whether it's set back sufficiently to be in scale and in character with the surrounding property, that there will still be safe egress and ingress to the house and utility and service connectivity to the house, and whether the porch will remain to be compliant with other local ordinances, one of them being that this is still customarily incidental use or an accessory use to the dwelling it's attached to, and not going to be used as like a accessory dwelling unit or anything like that. So there's just some baseline benchmarks that I put forth for you to consider, and that's kind of what the list I just ran through. If you can check those boxes, I recommend just that as part of building review, the building official should maintain that there's still the same access to the house and there's still utilities and services connected the same way, and that this won't be a second dwelling or anything like that. And otherwise, that the applicant should use color tones and materials that are consistent with the white, dark gray, and earth tone color tones applied on the rest of the home. So if you look at the map on the overhead here, and then additionally I have just a couple of graphics in the packet, what I call Exhibit A and B. One of those just shows that there are other properties. Well, first of all, Exhibit A kind of shows you the street view of the street, and I drove down it again today. It looks pretty much the same as it did when this August 2018 street view was taken. And then one is just showing that on Exhibit B that there are other properties with setbacks that are about within that 15-foot range. So this isn't really out of character with the neighborhood. And so if you can get through those review components, then I think you can approve this special use permit.
Any comments or questions of Dan? Okay. The applicant here in the audience, come forward, please, to the podium. And your name and?
Brian Sindelar.
Okay. Anything that you want to add? Dan gave an introduction to this.
No, it's just, like he said, it was just an existing porch where we had the decking replaced because it was rotting. And we replaced that. And then we started the construction of, the actual enclosure with the windows. And we're working on the door aspect right now. And then in the spring, we'll be, putting on the siding and things of that nature. We're getting bids right now, but everything is set back so far. A lot of new construction.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for you, if you would. Are you good with the material stuff that Dan had mentioned? He just wanted to make sure that the materials, it appears by my reading, are matching with the rest of the house, things like that. That not a problem for you?
And that's not a problem.
Okay. So I don't know, did you have any other comments? Because
No other comments.
Okay.
So for my part, I think this seems fine. We have a structure to approve it, and I think that it's non-problematic for me. I think that looking through the criteria, this project meets it. I would also say that it was interesting to me that this came to the Planning Commission as opposed, this feels like a ZBA case, right? So structurally, I don't know why the ordinance was set up, and it seems really specific to this instance that it goes to Planning Commission. So I'm not sure if that's something we may want to look at longer term to send this the other way, but generally I'll say I'm supportive of approving this, and I think it makes all the sense in the world for it.
I make a motion, we open the public hearing.
Support.
Okay, I have a motion by Tyler, supported by Steve, to open the public hearing. All those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. The public hearing's open. Is any comments from the audience?
I make a motion to close the public hearing?
Support.
Motion by Pat, supported by Tyler, to close the public hearing. All those in favor, aye? Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Tyler.
I drove down that street and the house next door has an enclosed porch. The house across the street has an enclosed porch. I mean, this isn't like,
When was this a subdivision initially? And when was it first built? Do you know?
This house was built in 46, and from what I understand, it's always was there as an enclosed porch, or I'm sorry, as a outdoor porch.
You said 1926?
46.
Okay.
It was
But,
the second house on the block,
and this is suburban residential, is that the zoning?
correct?
Now, we'd want 35 feet front setback, and even the backs, I mean, they got garages and stuff right on the lot line at least, so, I mean, everything, yeah, I agree that the house next to them looks almost identical footprint.
Yeah, the house next door, that was the first house on the block. So I'm sure it was the same architecture that built the second one.
Pre-existing plat, and a lot of the homes may be non-conforming with our current zoning standards.
But I'm sure it was at the time. Yeah.
Most likely.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion, case number 18-846, I make a motion to approve the special exception use permit application from owner Brian Sindelar to enclose a previously unenclosed 17-foot-7 by 8-foot-2 porch at the subject lot of 1529 Winslow Street Northwest under section 94-248-2 of the walking and zoning ordinance, based on the following findings of fact. The establishment, maintenance, location, or operation of the enclosed porch will not be detrimental to or endanger the public because there are other such structures in the vicinity. The enclosed porch is compatible with the intent of the zoning district and will not change the essential character of the surrounding area because there are other such structures in the vicinity. The enclosed porch will not impede the use or enjoyment of and will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of nearby properties. The enclosed porch will provide adequate egress, ingress, and utility and service access to the dwelling, and the enclosed porch will conform to the Walker zoning ordinance and other applicable local, state, and federal laws.
Support?
Motion by Tyler, supported by Steve, to approve the application with the bases noted in motion. Any comments, questions? Bring it to a vote. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion for case number 18-846. I make a motion to approve the application materials, including a site plan from owner Brian Sindelar to enclose a previously unenclosed 17-foot-7 by 8-foot-2 porch at the subject lot of 1529 Winslow Street Northwest. Conditions of approval. The conditions noted in the planning director's letter dated 10/10/2019.
Support.
Again, motion by Tyler, supported by Steve, to approve the site plan associated with this project. All those in favor, aye? Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. It's been approved.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Just work with the building inspector as you go through that process then.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Next case is case number 19-845, Target Facade and Signage Updates, PUD Amendment, 3248 Alpine. Applicant Kimley Horn, on behalf of Dayton Hudson Corporation, seek an amendment to the final area site plan for the Green Ridge Square planned unit development to allow facade improvements and wall signage updates involving taking what was previously approved, approximately 256 square feet of signage on the front and west wall, and to convert that into 195 feet of wall signage on the front west wall and 29 square feet of wall signage on the south elevation facing Center Drive. With that as an introduction, Dan, could you, as the planning director, describe the application as we go forward?
Sure, thanks. So this is a fairly simple review. This being a project that's in a planned unit development, There's often some flexibility to things like signage that are applied to sites in PUDs, and this target site is no different. So when there's an alteration to a previously approved sign package at a building like this, in a PUD, if there's a change in the nature of adding signs to a side of the building there weren't signs on before, things of that nature, then we really should technically run this through as a PUD amendment, because if you recall, the current zoning ordinance allows only up to 120 square feet of signage for a building that's this large, or building over 100,000 square feet. And so now we're looking at spreading out, about over 200 square feet, so 225-ish square feet of signage on two sides of the building. And so that requires this review by the Planning Commission. I think it's a pretty simple review process. There was an update to the original signage back in 1998 to extend and enlarge the front wall signage to increase the total square footage up to 256. And now we're talking about adding signage on the side and shrinking that signage on the front. So a pretty simple set of amendments there, and I think it's a fairly straightforward review, and I think that the sign package that's proposed is still to scale with the building facade and meets the architectural style of the overall Green Ridge shopping area. And in fact, a lot of the buildings in the Green Ridge Shopping Center have 1.5 to 1 ratio of square footage of wall sign on the front wall to the wall length. And so you actually see a lot more of the front facades of the stores, like the Kirkland store and stuff like that, that's actually taken up by signage in comparison to this. So I certainly think this is appropriate. This is just also an opportunity for the Planning Commission to take a look at the facade upgrades here. PUDs should also meet the architectural standards that we have for facades, and that's something that staff can review administratively and put a check on, but you might as well take a look at that as well as part of this sign review. So what I see here is some upgrades to the soffit, I think some metal, and there's some stucco near the front wall, otherwise some repainting of the tilt-up panel. And if I missed anything, I'm sure the gentleman here from representing Target could give a more comprehensive update to what they're doing with the facade there. But it's a pretty big store. It's one of the busiest Target stores, I think, in the region, and so it's an important building and a good opportunity for you to see what it's going to look like in the near future if it gets approved. So I do recommend approval. I have some visuals and some packet materials as always, but my recommendation is pretty straightforward for a conditional approval. This is a public hearing.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Any other comments, questions before having the applicant come forward? Okay. Would the applicant come forward, give your name, address, and affiliation?
Yeah, hi. I'm Kevin Nowak. I'm representing Target. I work for Kimley Horn and Associates, address 1001 Warrenville Road in Lisle, Illinois. And as Mr. Power said, he gave a very good, thorough description. This is just in line with Target's national rebranding movement, where they are updating a lot of their facades. Other updates include interior, but I mean, that would be a separate installment. But yeah, so the big thing, they're trying to increase visibility, hence the sign on the southern facade. And then also they like to implement that red stucco ephes to make the big bullseye pop. And as you can see, they're kind of doing away with a lot of their lettering, the big Target lettering, and they're just sticking with the bullseye. So this is in line with their national rebranding movement. And as mentioned, this is a popular store, so they would like to keep that branding in line with their national movement. So yeah, thank you.
Any comments or questions? This is a public hearing, so we'll open the public hearing and take comments and then go from there.
Motion to open the public hearing?
Support.
Motion by Tyler, supported by Pat to open the public hearing. All those in favor, aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Is there any comment from the
Make a motion to close the public hearing?
Support.
Motion by Pat, supported by Tyler to close the public hearing. All those in favor, aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Yeah, it does look like it's a good idea to have that identification on that south elevation and reapportioning the sign areas. It's been pretty good.
Yeah. Building was due for a refresh, I think, and we're excited to see it in our part of town, I think.
Yeah, I like the colors, the color change
Yeah.
is pretty cool.
Going to try to get it done before the holidays or after?
You know what, I'm unsure on the timeline, but we can figure that out and communicate that to you guys.
Because that front there, you're going to block all those doors. It's going to be a kind of a mess for a little bit.
Ooh.
I will get you, I'll get you a timeline there.
Well, we ready for a motion?
Yep.
All right, I'll make a motion for case 19-845. I'll make a motion to approve the final area site plan amendment, the Green Ridge Square Plan Unit Development per sections 94-21310 and 94-220 of the Walker zoning ordinance to allow facade improvements and wall signage updates, including a change from plus or minus 256 square feet of signage previously approved on the front/west wall to a total sign area of plus or minus 195 square feet of wall signage on the front west wall and plus or minus 29 square feet of wall signage on the south elevation facing Center Drive per the findings of fact, and subject to the conditions noted below for the property located at 3248 Alpine Avenue Northwest. Proposed signage PUD benefit findings of fact per section 94-220. The proposed sign package, which includes 2 wall signs on the front west wall with a total area of plus or minus 195 square feet, and 1 wall sign on the south elevation with a total area of plus or minus 29 square feet in comparison with the limit to signage not exceeding 120 square feet in a building with an area of greater than 100,000 square feet as imposed by the Walker zoning ordinance. Typical commercial wall sign restrictions is acceptable because a more appropriate overall project can be achieved by not imposing typical commercial wall sign restrictions. Commercial wall sign restrictions are not required to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of the inhabitants and users of the development and of adjoining property. Typical commercial wall sign restrictions are not required to provide adequate assurance against visual clutter or driver distraction. Joint signs to be shared by different uses in other aspects of the overall site design do provide additional limits on negative signage impacts, and the design of the project's overall sign package is appropriate. Conditions of PUD approval: the applicant agrees to all conditions noted in the planning director's letter dated 10/10/2019.
Support.
So we have a motion and support to approve the application as submitted. Call it to question. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good night.
Thank you. Now we're on to the final item. And Dan, if you could introduce the zoning ordinance text amendments.
Sure. Lining them up and knocking them down. The ordinance committee has been busy, and sometimes their process and getting things in queue is ebbs and flows based on how busy all the other boards are that the ordinance committee is composed of, and how important some of the amendments seem to be that are coming through the door. There's always good ideas about how to update our zoning ordinance amendments, and so we're always putting things in queue and considering them, but the ordinance committee has been meeting lately and really drilling down on some of these things that we've been looking at for a while. So tonight, the way that I've set this up is to open a public hearing, and we can go through model motions for the individual items, so that there's a clean break between them if we prefer to do it that way. And so I think I have discrete motions for all 4 of these zoning ordinance amendments that were noticed for tonight. If you recall, we talked about 3 of these 4 in May, and one of these is a new topic that was sort of low-hanging fruit that we thought was good to pick up. So that new one is some further amendments to the residential, I say residential fencing, but it's really all fencing. And then the other ones that we've already visited are temporary use requirements, and more specifically mobile food vendor or food truck requirements, and requirements for electronic message center signage. So I I guess the way that I can go through these is, I guess what I'd like to do is go through a slide deck that shows all four, and then we can go back and talk through them individually if you'd like, and we can open the hearing after I run through these, and then consider the motions after we close the public hearing, but we can revisit any one of these.
Okay.
So the first topic here, which we did review in May, but we had some more work to do. We've refined this and fine-tuned it a little bit. I'll run back through what we talked about then as a refresher. A lot of this stuff has not changed, but we did get more specific on some stuff, and some stuff may have changed a little bit. So there's sort of two aspects to this use. One is that you're talking about having a temporary land use on a specific site, and then the other is that you're talking about sort of a type of business that needs to be licensed in some manner. And so those are sort of two separate items we've been putting into two boxes here. And the way that I'm trying to describe this is through the graphic I show on this slide. Basically, any site can have mobile food vending as a temporary use on their site. Each one of the vendors who provides the food or the drink product, whatever it is, will have their own license or registration. And originally we were talking about some sort of a registration process, but functionally this can be picked up through the solicitor license process that the clerk's office already has. So I'll start on the left side of the screen. If somebody wants to have a food truck on their lot, and in full transparency, we've had these trickle through over the years on a case-by-case basis, and we largely follow these same standards, but now we're just codifying them to keep things consistent. So if you want to have a food truck on your lot, first of all, let's link you back to the vendors. They have to get licensed through the solicitor license process that I'll talk about. But otherwise, this has to be on a occupied lot. It can be in we set this up for any zoning district with no overnight parking, so that keeps this from being more of a permanent use on a site. If you're going to park on a site, you got to do it in a way that you have, you're maintaining access for around the food truck, so there's still continuous circulation for other vehicles, 12-foot one-way circulation or 26-foot two-way circulation, that there's no impediment to the minimum number of required parking spaces. So think in terms of Grand Rapids Press, for an example. That's one business that I know has had a activity here or there. They have a huge parking lot. They're not going to have a parking capacity issue, but there may be situations in certain areas where you have to make sure that you're still abiding by the parking limits, where maybe a parking variance was granted. Food trucks probably couldn't occupy that space, for example. There should be a 10-foot setback from a building, and that helps with fire risk and fire separation. And then there should be, at least as of the way it's written now, none of these are going to be serving alcohol unless you're talking about a food truck or a truck that's part of a broader commercial special event, and that's its own type of temporary use. The other thing that we were looking at, and just using some comparison communities as an example, let's keep these 200 feet away from brick and mortar buildings or restaurants, and that's not going to come into play in a lot of Walker. Where we've seen much of the food truck activity so far is, again, on these case-by-case examples where you're going to have a food truck on a large industrial business site, or a large develop like Meyer Corporate or Grand Rapids Press Corporate. If it does come into play in a place like Standale, at the end of the day, 200 feet is not that much separation. So it's not going to take away from the idea that you can have food trucks in this downtown district and keep that vitality there. It's just going to be so that you're not directly competing with somebody right next door or right on the same lot. And that's from the building.
Yeah. And there is provision that if the owner gives express permission, that can be allowed too. So if like Chowhound wanted to have a food truck on their site, if they got permission from Jimmy John's, they would be fine there.
I'll make sure that that language is in the final draft that goes to City Commission. Because I know it didn't make it on this slide, but I do remember talking about that.
Actually, it didn't hear Dan.
Okay, good. And on the other side, you have these business owners, the individual vendors. So these vendors are going to have to get a annual solicitor license approval, and that will assume that they're going to get a sign off from the fire department that they have safe fire equipment and verification of a current health department license and an applicant's signature committing to adhering to local applicable regulations. And it would involve review by the fire department as well. So any vendor that comes in for the first time in a given year, we'd have to verify that they have a current solicitor license through the clerk's office. So that's how the specific topic of food trucks is set up. We can revisit that. I guess before I go on to the next slide, any questions about food trucks and how this topic has evolved?
I looked at this thing a couple times, and you've got a gray box, and it says annual solicitor license, and then you've got a yellow box, and it says annual solicitor license. What's the difference?
Yeah, good question. Those are just meant to represent two different food trucks.
Okay.
And so,
Okay.
one thing that that's a good question though, because we talked at one point about limits on the number of vendors at a given site, and we decided to be hands off on that. So you could have as many vendors as you want, as long as you are abiding by the stuff on that left column. So you still have space for everybody to park and safe movement around the site. But that's just representing that there might be two vendors at that site that each have their own license.
There, I believe, is some private coordination between the food trucks in the area that they self-organize who's going to be where. So we're unlikely to run into an issue with that.
Now, there are some communities where they have food truck rallies, or they may have a food truck at an event. How would those be addressed in light of this regulation?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So at some point there would need to be a call made that this is, perhaps it's its own animal at that point. You might have something that's more like a commercial special event or a special event in a public zoning district that would be falling in line with that kind of thing, a food truck rally. If Community Park wanted to do something like that, it might be its own special event, in which case it's not the city applying for a food truck for to allow food trucks for the year. It's the city having its own permit for that one-time event where a bunch of food trucks are.
Would that circumstance be addressed by the second item on this right here?
Yeah, and that's you're talking about the overall temporary use permit restructuring? Yeah, we can look at that. So within the framework of our whole smattering of temporary uses, I would consider that to be what I call outdoor events. We do explicitly say outdoor events limited to festivals, fairs, carnivals, craft shows, athletic tournaments and events, concerts, farmers markets, auto shows. So I would say it's somewhat consistent with festivals that we would permit as their own temporary use.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Do we want to go to the next one? Okay.
Well, yeah, I think if we go over each one of them, then like you said, open the public hearing, and then we can have a separate motion for each one of them.
Sure.
I think you described that. It sounds like a good way to go.
Okay. And so go through the slides, and then we'll go back through public. Okay, got it. All right. So the next item is thinking about the whole nature of this temporary use code that we have. There are a lot of activities. We want to encourage creative land use and unique activities and be hands-off where we need to be, or where we benefit as a community from being hands-off, but have enough purview to make sure these events are monitored for safety and regulated in some fashion. So what we want to do with the way I'm proposing this restructuring here, and that first staff worked through and then we brought to the ordinance committee, is to provide a little bit of administrative flexibility and to account for as many temporary uses as we kind of know about, but to say that there may be some other ones that the zoning administrator or the ZBA can weigh in on and permit. But the way the ordinance is set up right now, most of the stuff you see on the screen here is already permitted. There are some newer items that we more specifically defined this year. For example, leasing trailers for an apartment complex. And now that we've had a wave of apartments going in, this might not come up again for a while, but we might as well have this in there. So the idea being that as long as they're safe and accessible, you can have a trailer where people come to the site and get to know the plans for the property, as long as there's parking around those trailers and safe access. Accessory limited camping, and that's the type of thing that you might have on an occupied residential, school, or church or other religious type of site. Otherwise, a lot of the stuff you see on the screen, and the only other one that's new is food trucks. Everything else you see on the screen is already in the code somewhere, and then it's just a matter of whether this stuff is reviewed and goes through the formal permit review process in terms of going to the zoning administrator, going to the police department, going to the building official, and fire department, or if it's just administratively accepted without a permit, and we kind of don't review it unless we have to. So things like the leasing trailers, temporary construction trailers, any construction site is going to have some trailers on it, so we should acknowledge that there's going to be construction trailers related to ongoing construction activity. The limited camping, seasonal farm housing in the agricultural zoning district, seasonal farm stands in the agricultural zoning district, or similar uses subject to the discretion of the zoning administrator. And then you go on the side of things that would require a more formal review, a permit. So things like food trucks, tent sales already require a permit. Temporary event housing, I think this one was written specifically for the Deltaplex, so temporary event housing for concerts, outdoor events, things like festivals, produce sales on non-agriculturally zoned lots, and you can think of the Potter Orchard site that used to be at Lake Michigan Drive in Wilson. It's probably going to move now that we have the development there. Fireworks stands, those would require a permit still to be issued because they're a little bit more extensive in terms of their impact. But for all of these, there is the ability to have the zoning administrator provide discretion if there's something additional that's not defined, or have the ZBA weigh in if it's something that the zoning administrator finds would be questionable in terms of compromising adjacent traffic patterns and adjacent land uses, then take it to the ZBA. Or if it's a fundamental life safety issue, then probably it's not appropriate. So that's just the restructuring, and we kind of include new categories and tease out administrative approvals from permit required uses. So that's something the ordinance committee has been working on for a few months as well. Any questions about this slide?
The only thing I had one question, just the hours that you have for temporary outdoor events. I saw the hours 10 p.m. till 8 a.m. Can that, I didn't know if you wanted to push that to like 9 a.m. instead of 8 a.m., but my understanding. Just bring it up.
Yeah, that was just leaving as is.
That's
That's a
fine.
good question though. Does come up with the end hour is something that comes up, especially the,
Today, 10 p.m.
yeah, yeah,
Start for the last 3 or 4 hours.
right. Okay. Come on, I'll just do that. Okay, so this next one, fences are tricky. We've always had some issues with fence enforcement, and communities handle fences differently. In Walker, we've taken the stance that residential fences, we're not going to undergo the permitting and inspection process for fences. So we want to make our rules really clear, and if you're inclined to break the rules, which I think I saw Scott nodding his head, because often our zoning board of appeals will see cases for maybe privacy fencing in the front yard or fencing crossing drainage easements, those kinds of things that we discourage, but sometimes make their way to the Zoning Board of Appeals. But in any event, there is no formal permit process or review process in the field for fences, largely because that would require a lot of administration that we just haven't really set up for. And we are cautiously optimistic that we can get people to follow the rules by good outreach and good education without having to go through the permit process. So that being said, there's always exceptions to what we want the outcome to be, and we've had a resident-initiated effort to have some more stringent requirements in our fence code, some of which makes a lot of sense, and you see those requirements in yellow. And so the idea that perimeter fencing should be installed so that the person installing it is certain that the outer edge is within the subject lot. So perimeter fencing is on the fence line, and 99 times out of 100, the neighbors will have a common understanding of what that means, or on the property line rather. But this is just to protect against those instances where maybe you have a fence that encroaches, you don't want that to fall on the other side of the lot line. This is also stuff that should be understood, but bears repeating and bears making explicit in the code that you shouldn't construct over buried cables, irrigation systems, public water and sewer systems, in addition to easements for stormwater drainage, which we already require fences not to be allowed to go over, at least the structural part of fences. So maybe we've talked in the past about swinging gates, maybe can be an exception to that. But anything where you're sticking posts in the ground cannot go over these types of systems. So those are kind of those quality control aspects of fencing that we want to make sure there's explicit rules about. Otherwise, I did make some changes to just resort this ordinance, and some of the stuff that we say for residential only fencing also applies to fencing in general. So having the good side facing out, meaning the posts and whatnot are not exposed to your neighbor, they're going to be exposed to the person who installs it. And that should be true whether it's a commercial or residential site. And there might have been one other thing that got resorted, but basically teasing out the general from the specific, and the specific is what you see here. So for residential fencing, 4-foot front yard chain link fence is usually okay with a small gauge, and then you can do your privacy fencing with 6-foot height in the side and rear yard. For non-residential or commercial industrial, you can go up to 6 in the front, 10 in the rear. But the new rules are here in yellow, so let me know if you have any questions about those.
The must withstand a 100-pound weight. Say I got a wire fence on the farm there, can I put it on top of the fence and it won't collapse, or how are you doing that?
Yeah, let me double check that, because agricultural fencing has a lot more leniency, and we might tease this out from residential, non-agricultural, and then there's non-residential, and we may be silent on some of those, the farm type fencing.
Okay.
So,
Let's not allow a 500-pound cow to get out.
yeah, that's a good question though, because we don't want to be too stringent on, yeah, we tease out within that section, we're kind of silent on agricultural fencing, but for, we say for non-agricultural purposes in a lot of cases, X, Y, and Z apply, but we don't regulate agricultural.
Okay.
So I think some of those would be exempt. Okay, ready for the last one?
Oh, boy.
This one's the most colorful slide of them all. We have had a good discussion about electronic message center signs. We talked about back in May the ability for those signs to provide a lot of different messaging rather than having 10 different temporary banner signs on a yard. Look at this great new innovation, not new anymore, but this great innovation where you can change your message many times throughout the day and advertise different things through these EMC signs. The problem becomes when they become visually distracting to drivers and a safety nuisance for the roadways. And that's why there was a pretty stringent requirement put on these signs when they first came into our ordinance between 2007 and 2012, that they couldn't change any more frequently than once every 30 seconds. One of the problems that we've had is an enforcement problem. It's hard to track the signs, and when we do, we find some people are out of compliance. But more specifically, there was a big push by, I think a lot of business owners would prefer this, but right here on our campus, there was some push for a less stringent changeover from between messages. The original proposal was once every 10 seconds, and I provided some data that compared us to our neighboring municipalities, and that looked like it was in line. And we were at the point where we recommended a ordinance to update that to 10 seconds. But then lo and behold, I found out that there was some faulty data in what was shared before. So I wanted to revisit this because what we found out is that Grand Rapids, which is an important neighbor and an important piece of context for us, they actually don't allow any changes more frequently than once every 5 minutes, and previously it was stated 5 seconds. So that's a big difference. I wanted to make sure we had cleaner data to look at, including that data point, but also to look at more examples in more communities that are sort of similar to Walker. So I cast a wider net. I looked elsewhere in the state, and I also did a little bit of research to see what is the science behind this. How do we determine when it's visually distracting? And at the end of the day, what I found is this study seems to be a pretty good source of data, although it's only one data point. It seems to be good math and good logic. At a 500-foot distance, if you're driving 35 miles an hour, you're gonna see something. So it's roughly 10.6 seconds. You'd see one sign change in that time, driving 35 miles an hour, based on being able to see the sign at 500 feet away. And that's probably a good point of reference for us, because a lot of our roads where EMC signs are permitted are going to be those 35 mile an hour or faster roads. So if you're driving faster, you'll see it even less frequently change. But the idea here is that I think we should just pick something that, or I would recommend picking something that indicates that the sign is not going to change a lot over the course of somebody driving on a regular roadway. Of course, in traffic, you're going to see more and more changeovers. On high-speed roads, you're going to see less. But I think we should start with a place of, first of all, comparing to what other communities have with better data for that, and also seeing that the signs won't change a bunch of times if you're driving a reasonable speed limit. So between those two things, and with comparison community data from a variety of communities showing a median more like 12 and a half seconds rather than lower what we had shown before, the ordinance committee decided to go ahead and recommend a little bit less frequent change to 15 seconds. So that's sort of a compromise. It's twice as lenient as we currently are, but it may bring more people into willingness to comply without being chased down through the code enforcement process. And with a typical roadway with not many of these signs lined up next to one another, that's going to be reasonably assuring that drivers won't see a lot of messages changing over and getting distracted on the road. So wanted to just bring this back with a new recommendation from the ordinance committee after the new data was found. And so there's the new recommendation.
And that's 15 seconds for the message to be changed, because I've seen signs where the message stays the same, but all of a sudden change colors or change other things.
Yeah,
Get your attention every 3 or 4 seconds.
right. That's a good question. No blinking, flashing, scrolling,
These
strobing.
aren't flashing, they just change color. They just
Yeah, that's a
very
good one. That might be a
they go
loophole.
from red, yellow, green, orange.
I think we would
The
interpret
messages-
that as a blink.
Yeah, it's sort of a blink. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I think that it may be viewed as, if it's defined such that it gives the illusion or the appearance of movement, that it would be covered in that
It'd be called
respect.
a change.
Yep.
I think you went from red to blue or something, I would call that a change.
Yeah, yep.
Well, hearings.
All right.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing for, do we do all of them at once, or do we, okay, for the,
I don't know, ask the crowd.
Yeah, the way this was noticed,
What's the flavor?
I'd feel comfortable opening one, because this was all captured under one
one case number?
item, so I think you can open for all of them at once.
Yeah, so I'll open the public hearing for case 19-827, the zoning ordinance text amendments.
Support.
Motion by Steve, supported by Tyler, to open the public hearing for the zoning ordinance amendments. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. No public comment?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Support.
Motion by Steve, supported by Tyler, to close the public hearing. All those in favor, aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Could probably have four different motions here.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion for case number 19-827, Part 2A. I make a motion to recommend adoption of the proposed ordinance amendments to Chapter 94 of the City of Walker Code of Ordinance zoning to provide further mobile food vending and mobile food vendor definitions and regulations, and to accordingly amend Chapter 94 of the Walker City Code, Article 1 in general and Article 18 temporary uses. Finding of fact, the proposed ordinance amendment will promote the public health, safety, morals, and welfare.
Support. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Motion by Tyler, supported by Pat, to approve the proposed amendment. Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion for case number 19-827, Part 2B. I make a motion to recommend adoption of the proposed ordinance amendments to Chapter 94 of the City of Walker's Codes of Ordinances zoning to simplify temporary land use regulations and to provide additional discretion to the zoning administrator for purposes of enforcing these regulations, and to accordingly amend Chapter 94 of the Walker City Code, Article 18, temporary uses. Finding of facts, the proposed ordinance amendment will promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare.
Support.
Motion by Tyler, supported by Scott, to approve the proposed amendment to simplify the temporary land use regulations. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
I'm done.
I can get the next one. Mr. Chair, for case 19-827, Part 2C, I'll make a motion to recommend adoption of the proposed ordinance amendments to Chapter 94 of the Walker City Code zoning, Section 94-337, fences and walls, to restrict the placement of perimeter fencing and the prohibition of fence construction over buried cables, irrigation systems, and public water and sanitary sewer utilities, and reformatting ordinances regarding fencing. Findings of fact, the proposed ordinance amendment will promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare.
Support.
Motion by Steve, supported by Pat, to approve the proposed amendment to the regulate fencing and Walker zoning ordinance. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
All right, and for case 19-827, Part 2D, I will make a motion to recommend adoption of the proposed ordinance to amend Chapter 94 of the City of Walker's Code of Ordinances, zoning to reduce the minimum frequency of electric message center EMC signs, and to accordingly amend Chapter 94 of the Walker City Code, Article 14, signs. Findings of fact per Section 94-406A of the Walker zoning ordinance. The proposed ordinance amendment will protect and further the health, safety, and welfare of city residents, property owners, and visitors, will be consistent with the goal of reducing traffic and pedestrian accidents caused by signs which will obstruct vision, distract, disorient, or confuse drivers or pedestrians, or are improperly secured or constructed, will conserve and enhance community character by reducing visual clutter which can arise due to excessive signage, temporary signage, or other signage that is improperly located or unreasonably distracting, will promote the economic viability of commercial areas by minimizing visual clutter and allowing for proper placement of signs to safely direct motorists to their destination. Will promote the use of signs that are safe, aesthetically pleasing, compatible with their surroundings, and legible in the circumstances in which they are seen.
Support.
Motion by Steve, supported by Scott, to recommend proposed amendment to alter the electronic message center sign change frequency. In terms of discussion, I'd like to offer just a perspective that I do have concerns. I feel that the 30 seconds that's in place is sufficient to meet the needs of our public, both in terms of the residents as well as the business owners. I'm not as comfortable that the additional distraction that might be associated with reducing that from 30 to 15 seconds.
I would also offer that if you're at 15 seconds, that means one driver will only see one message. So it doesn't really matter if you're at 15 or 30, because the driver can't see more than one message. So what would be you're accomplishing the same thing at 30 seconds as same as 15 seconds. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I personally, my struggle and the reason that I'm supporting it is that when we have folks on our own city campus that are out of compliance with it, there seems to be value to reducing that time to get ourselves and the more signs we can get into compliance, the better. And if our facilities are not in compliance and we entrust that we are operating correctly, then I think there's value to meeting the timeline that makes sense.
In terms of, Mark mentioned, it's not just a matter of that one sign, it's a matter of all the other distractions. If you've got a number of electronic message centers, and I think they're becoming more numerous, then you do have you're going to have a battery of them perhaps in a short period of distance for that to take place. Again, we have different perspectives on it, and then we collectively come up with a decision on it, and we bring it to a vote.
As well.
Okay, all those in favor of the proposed amendment to the electronic message center sign frequency change to the zoning amendment, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Aye. Motion carries. Yeah,
This thing's moving on your dashboard.
Yeah.
yeah.
So we're talking about this a lot at the state level right now, and we're proposing certain type of physical signage as opposed to electronic signage for road projects. And the amount of sign clutter that we're talking about is crazy. We're talking about every time you do a road project over $100,000 having to put a sign up for that project. Now, typical road maintenance can cost $100,000 on freeway. So you think going over the same mile of freeway, you could have 3 different signs in one spot because you've had to go back and do projects. And these are permanent signs that we're talking about until you do another full reconstruct. So if we could turn that into an electronic sign that just swipes through periodically, and that would still meet that signage requirement, I would argue you're reducing visual clutter. So in situations where folks the alternative is putting up more signs for more to meet that messaging demand for them, I think that's an instance where there's value to that.
All right. It's good perspective.
I wasn't happy about that side though.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff that comes through.
I think the comment that Steve made concerning the special exception, from my standpoint, I'm in agreement with him that that's something that I think could be designated for an administrative decision. Would seem to be appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, whether you guys want to do that because it's already an existing footprint, or if we want to even send it to ZBA to have, because that seems like a more appropriate level of review than our, it seems outside our typical purview, in planning.
I have a theory, I get in trouble with theories. Special uses in Walker used to be administered through the ZBA at some point. I don't know when that changed over or how, but I just see old records of special use permit reviews by the ZBA. And at some point we said special use permit ties to a site plan review and goes to the planning commission.
Right, and
Yeah, either way, this is a pretty minor item, and the other one that goes with it is also pretty minor, so it seems like that was kind of odds and ends stuff that
Yeah.
somebody at some point maybe just didn't feel comfortable reviewing administratively, so they stuck it in the code that way.
Yeah, and the typical special exception uses, I think, do belong here. But
Yeah.
for something
Yeah.
like this,
Like
it's,
that?
it's,
Come on.
I think it's technically different than what we're used to seeing here.
Yeah. I agree. Well, I have it in queue for an ordinance committee discussion, maybe to strike it or simplify it.
Yeah, because even timing wise, to have somebody,
They didn't seem happy to be here.
yeah,
Well, how much did it cost him to be here?
$250.
Yeah, $250. On something that is,
so that's why it's good that we have the opportunity to communicate, in this case, as an ordinance committee, that maybe a second look at this and
Yeah.
and find a more straightforward process and less costly.
that's costly.
Well, we gotta keep the lights on for the department, I suppose, and,
No, that's
fee
a
for
good point.
service, right?
Any other staff or commissioner update?
November 6th is a pretty light agenda as well. The Grand Rapids Butterworth facility is proposing some changes that I want to run by the PC in terms of their compost yard. And otherwise, something pretty light in terms of just updating on some of the projects we've reviewed. So another light agenda in early November. And then, like I said, the tentative open house date for the master plan is November 20th.
Are you anticipating any regular meeting agenda items that evening?
No, I'm not. Other than the Butterworth facility is technically a site plan amendment. They're adding a building on there, so that's the kind of thing that could come back for your review. But no, nothing else new is coming in.
Development slowing down a little bit.
It may be, that tends to happen this time of year. But we've had some heavy hitter projects in the last couple of years, but the overall volume of new applications has been slowing down. We have had shy of 20 new applications this year, as opposed to the last couple of years, it was a lot more.
Yeah.
On the Butterworth property, being owned by a government entity, there's no property taxes on that lot, correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's a there's no administrative review fee for government entities. And the idea, I think, is that you're buying into it as the public that supports it anyway. So if it's a publicly owned property, there's no review fee that goes with it from our standpoint. But yeah, that is a City of Grand Rapids owned lot, and they don't pay property tax to us, I believe.
Just a reason for our residents to be able to use it, maybe for a fee.
Yep.
And that's something
and
you
that's
brought
something
up.
that we did, that discussion did come up, and we're looking to have that conversation. I don't know if Commissioner Glanville's been talking further with that, about that with them, but they haven't engaged me at all about it.
Okay.
And I was probably gonna, after I talk to her, maybe go prospecting with them about it, because I think there would be value for us to have access to that facility as residents. And it being in Walker, seems like maybe
Yeah,
we can come to some financial agreement on it. Who's to say?
All right,
That's all I got.
Make my motion to adjourn now.
all right, very good. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.